Hello and welcome back to our 3 Things You Need to Consider for 2020 series on Simply Tax. I always enjoy this time of year as a tax advisor because everyone is thinking about tax, even if that means that I'll be thinking about tax on pretty much overdrive with all the tax returns that need to get filed or extended in the coming months. Each year, I generally find there are a few topics that aren't directly related to tax that I think those that I work with should consider. And today we're covering the second of those with a discussion on the changes to the accounting for leases and how to approach these changes with BKD's Chris Telli and Jessica Richter. Enjoy.
Simply Tax.
My name is Chris Telli. My primary client base is the public sector, governmental clients, municipalities, school districts. We do a lot of work with the state.
Okay.
And I'm Jessica Richter. My primary industry is telecom, which is a little different, but working with cellular providers, telephone providers, video, fiber, internet, all of the things that are included in that. So
Yeah. Okay. Well, good perspectives. I'm glad to have you both. And it being a tax guy, I do follow the GASBs and the FASBs and all that, but I will admit that they kind of intimidate me. So I'm looking forward to learning from you guys. But I know there's been some new standards with leases on both sides. Let's see. Do you want to start GASB or FASB? What do you think?
Let's jump in the GASB side just because that's how Lease Vision was born.
Okay.
Just like FASB, GASB introduced a new lease accounting standard, referred to as GASB 87. It changes the entire dynamic around leases from the current 2-model system to a 1-model system, basically. Our vision, if you will, was to come up with a product that could help our clients implement the new standard. It started out as being largely focused on our airport practice, which then it grew into our entire public sector practice and kept evolving. And then Jessica came on board as FASB had a similar standard that they were also trying to implement. And I'll let her talk a little bit about how we all got connected and how telecom met public sector.
yeah.
Okay. Just for listeners' sake, start with FASB and GASB. What are they? We're going to go real high level here and then kind of drill down. So maybe real quick before we transition over to the GASB side.
Sure. GASB is the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. It's the rule maker for the public sector, both state and local governments.
Right.
For accounting rules.
Okay.
So then the flip side is the FASB side, which is for private industry. So the Financial Accounting Standards Board, and they write all the rules to govern that side of the house. Mm-hmm. So telecom is very driven with a lot of leases, a lot of contracts that could be leases. And so that sort of spurred my interest. I have some significant clients that are going to be greatly impacted by the standard. It was released several years ago. I think 2016 is when it first started. And finally, now we're getting close to that implementation date for the private sector.
In the summer of 2019, the Financial Accounting Standards Board, or FASB as Jessica just told us, unanimously approved a 1-year delay in the adoption date of the new lease accounting standard for private companies and not-for-profit organizations until fiscal years beginning after December 15, 2020. The delay in part came in response to challenges faced by public companies who were required to adopt the standard for fiscal years beginning after December 15, 2018. As Chris, Jessica, and I will discuss, there's a lot of heavy lifting to do to adopt the standard, so it's best to just keep accounting and do the work as opposed to putting it off. Hence the reason it's the second of our 3 things to consider for 2020. Let's get back to the discussion. So a question for you both, because it's implementing these rules, maybe slight variations on, but I mean, these are big shifts, but maybe what is the shift and with leases, and then what are the challenges associated? Maybe Chris, we start on the GASB side.
Sure. Like I said, the big shift is you're taking the 2-model system of lease accounting as we have it today between capital leases and operating leases and creating 1 model. So everything will be considered, at least on the GASB side, everything will be considered a lease with some exception. You'll have a lease liability. On the lessor side, you'll have a lease receivable. So everything comes together under that umbrella, if you will. That's the big shift. And the challenges, one of the biggest challenges is not so much with the accounting side, it's getting your head around where your leases are, what your leases have. If you think about a municipality, if there is a decentralized municipality, you have leases all over the city. So someone has to actually spend the time to not only collect all those leases, but also analyze all those leases, see how they fit within the standard, and how they're going to go about recording them. Materiality plays into it, But you get into a situation where you really don't know what's material and what's not until you do the analysis. That's where we think Lease Vision can help.
Okay.
So similarly, the FASB side, I think, rocks the world a little bit more when you come to financial statements. So under existing FASB rules, operating leases don't show up anywhere on the balance sheet. And so FASB is trying to create greater transparency on the financial statements, recognizing that there is a liability associated with those leases.
Yeah.
And so as a result, we have to pull on this lease liability to the balance sheet and then this what they call right of use asset. And so how to create those numbers or come up with those calculations is challenging. There's a lot of components. It's gathering all those contracts, understanding what is a lease, what isn't a lease, and figuring out how you're going to do all that. And really, that's the goal of Lease Vision, is to help gather the information, analyze the specific contracts, determine what is or isn't a lease, what all do we have, make the calculations, and then actually help you be able to do the accounting entries that go with that.
Yeah.
So we're looming fast. So if you want internal financial statements that are accurate with the standard as of the beginning of the year, you need to be going now and doing all the work to calculate, gather all the data, do the analysis, and work on figuring out how your staff are going to be able to handle all of that on a go-forward basis. It's no small undertaking for sure. Even if you only have, maybe you think you only have 5 to 10 leases, you may end up, once you dig in, finding you have significantly more. The FASB standard, actually, you need to think about things like if you have data in the cloud, you're actually leasing space. Who has control? Could that potentially be a lease? Leasing a computer equipment, whether that's in the cloud, in a data center, if you're leasing space in a data center. These are new things that people don't necessarily think about. From the telecom perspective, if you have private circuits that connect, say, your buildings or your facilities in multiple states or within the state, potentially you have leased assets in those circumstances as well. So those are things in a technology day and age that people don't necessarily think about, but probably are there, and we really need to dig into.
Yeah, so I imagine that's causing a lot of opportunities to be able to help educate as well, because there's so much that's not there in terms of just the awareness of it.
Yep.
Chris, what do you think in terms of an example of how something like Lease Vision can help, again, or implementing the standard and so forth?
Sure. The first thing, there's many areas, but the first thing is picture a stack of leases sitting on your desk, a foot high, 2 feet high. If you think about an airport, when you walk through the airport, all those concessionaires you see walking through the concourse at the airport, those are all leases. They're on the less. The airport is a lessor in that case, but all of those are leases. None of those are recorded at the moment because they're all being handled as operating leases, at least for the most part. Those all need to be analyzed, gone through, computed as to what the receivable, in that case, the receivable and the offsetting deferred inflow would be, and then a determination made as to how to book it. But the first step is analyzing those leases, physically going through those leases once you've collected them all and reading them, figuring out what the key terms are. That's the first area where Lease Vision can really help. Using artificial intelligence, Kira, our product, we can run those leases through the system and come up with a report that will pick out the key terms within those lease agreements. It still will require folks to go through, the client to go through and look at those leases, but we believe it will dramatically cut down on their time of having to pick through each and every one of those leases and pull out all those key terms.
Yeah.
With that, they would then have the pertinent terms that they could then use as a basis for their analysis using the lease tool, the Excel-based lease tool that we put together.
Maybe example on the FASB side.
Yeah. So on the FASB side, any industry that you look at, healthcare is a real common one. There's a lot of leased equipment in a facility like that, whether it's the actual building, the equipment, the facilities, offices, you name it. Most of that is all leased. And so again, going through that giant stack of contracts, once you find them all, that's the first step. And companies really need to think about that, is figuring out, how do we get the stack? Where is the stack? Do we have copies of everything in the stack? Do we have stuff that's not on paper? Do we have things that are just a handshake agreement? And you need to know all of that to really make the proper analysis. So as Chris said, Kira is really where that'll come into play. So that's equally important on both sides, whether it's FASB or GASB. And then the next step is taking all those terms and then putting that into that Excel tool that we've developed. And so we have one to fit both the lessor and the lessee side on the GASB standard. And then on the FASB side, the lessor accounting hasn't changed dramatically under the FASB standard, but the lessee side is really where all the changes are at. So we have an Excel tool for transition because there's a package of practical expedients, which we expect most companies to adopt, makes life a little easier for the transition. So we have a transition version, and then we have another version for all leases that are entered into post-adoption of the standard. And that tool really takes them through all those components that we pick out of those contracts using Cura. Then you can enter those into the Excel tool. It will help you make all your initial calculations for your right-of-use assets, lease liabilities, deferred inflows, or lease receivables, as it were, on the lessor side of the GASB house, create amortization tables for all those contracts, help you develop journal entries, whether you want them monthly, quarterly, annual, semi-annual basis. We have tabs to pull lease balances at a given date if you want to analyze that information, as well as tabs to do an initial entry and document the dates that you made those entries into your system.
Wow, that's a lot of information,
Mm-hmm.
but really nice to have in one place for
Yes.
sure.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I don't know. So are you getting a sense that there's an awareness? Because I mean, obviously this is something it's not new, but maybe the adoption deadline is. So I don't know, are you guys getting a sense that there's a lot of awareness around there maybe?
I think people know that the standard is out there. I think they're underestimating the significant undertaking that will be to actually implement the standard.
No.
They're starting to see more things out of the public sector from their adoption because they had to adopt for 2019. And so public company as in SEC.
Yep.
Don't want to confuse that with public sector
Public sector.
GASB.
I know there's
Yeah.
a lot of, I'm glad you said that because
Yeah.
I get confused with that. I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, what are we talking about here again?
Don't
Yeah.
want to confuse the two.
Right.
So
Yeah.
SEC public. And there's been a lot of media about them having a difficult time implementing, which is then what's pushing AICPA actually requested FASB to delay for private sector for another year. It doesn't happen very often when they go and do something like that. So that means that they've definitely gotten a lot of feedback that this was really hard and a lot harder than anyone anticipated. And so I have a telecommunications client that I'm working with that has potentially 1,500 contracts that could result in a lease or not.
Yeah.
We think at the end of the day, because of the capacity versus actual tangible asset, we'll end up with somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 to 600 actual leases that need calculation. But we have to go through the analysis of all of them. And then I throw my auditor hat on and say, well, as an auditor, I need to make sure they did their due diligence to prove that the other 1,000 or 800 leases or contracts, didn't turn out to be a lease. So not only do we say, okay, that's great, you say these are leases, but what about all the other ones? How do you prove that they're not? And so we need that information as well to document from an audit perspective to ensure that they've properly scoped the contracts necessary to be looked at for lease. So there's that side of it as well. So it's not just a simple, here's all the leases. Well, what'd you do to prove all those other ones aren't? So that's important as well.
Making sure you have the right population.
Yeah. So if you get an annual audit, it's important that you think about that side of it as well.
I don't know, Chris, what do you think in terms of just the awareness and some of these challenges on the public sector with being that there's so many leases? Or contracts?
There's definitely an awareness out there. I sense an awareness both within my client base and amongst the public sector or governmental community in general. What I'm skeptical of is the preparedness. You know, the timing of the GASB lease standard, GASB 87, is the same as the FASB, at least currently is the same. And people look at it and say, okay, I got a whole year to get this done. I got plenty of time. They don't have plenty of time. We've been talking about it since it was an exposure draft 2 years ago. The various teams talking to different clients about getting ready for this thing. So my fear is the preparedness of getting. If clients wait until the audit of adoption, it's going to be too late. They'll never get it done if they have more than 100 leases. And like I said, these big organizations, 1,500 is a little bit unusual, but still. 300, 400, 500 is not. It's very possible that you have that. And if you think about the person hours that needs to be spent to go through that,
right?
I mean, it can be hundreds of hours,
right?
Reading through those agreements, not to mention the brain use of going through hundreds of leases.
So that's probably not work that you could do just like in succession and be like, well, I'm going to go knock out this couple hundred hours back to back,
Yeah.
So
a little break in there.
So my big concern is, will folks be ready? And then Jessica makes a great point on the audit side. Lease Vision is really designed to assist our clients, but at the same time, I think there will be a great deal of impact on the audit side. It is definitely designed to maintain independence. It's one thing that we've kept in mind through this entire process for obvious reasons. So that information will be usable to the auditors when it comes time to actually audit that implementation. And the challenges there are, just like Jessica said, is going to be completeness. Do you have the right population? Do you have all of the population? How did the client go about determining that population? And that could be a daunting task as well. So just getting through that is going to be challenging.
Talking about some of the challenges, because obviously there's just the challenge of getting through it, gathering it all, analyzing it, figuring out whether it needs to be treated that way or not. But just in terms of the awareness of what that's going to mean for financial statements, are you finding that there's, especially with the public, not public sector, but public implementation, that there is an awareness and understanding that it changes the financial statements? I don't know. Just what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. Again, I think private companies are underestimating the impact significantly because they just don't grasp all these other things, like I mentioned before, especially when you get into the tech side, all the things that could be leases. I think they're like, oh, well, I lease my copy machine and I lease maybe an office space and okay, I'm done. And they don't really think about the big picture and about every single thing. We've talked a lot about how it's going to change things. And I've been preaching consistently in every presentation I've done about make sure your lenders know. This is pulling liabilities onto the balance sheet that didn't previously exist. And these liabilities have both a current and a non-current component, but the right of use asset only has a long-term component. So things like current ratios could be thrown off. And if that's a significant component of your debt covenants, that could have an impact. It could also, additional indebtedness is a term often used in debt agreements. And so making sure that the debt agreement specifically defines what is additional indebtedness, because we have this new liability. Well, is that going to be considered an indebtedness under the terms of the debt, or is it not? And you need to make sure that's scoped correctly. So in the telecom world, we've been trying to work with some of the major banks that work in the telecom space and kind of create some awareness there so they understand what's going to be happening, because it is going to be pretty impactful in that arena. And they're like, oh, wow, that's good information. Thanks for telling us. Yeah. So, and I'm not sure everyone has gone to that extent. And so it's really important to have communication with lenders. Hey, I think I've got some stuff that's going to happen here. Can we work together rather than waiting until it's too late and you've adopted and then you've tripped a covenant? So it's much better to try to be proactive in that situation, especially when you're talking about debt that could get called, than it is to wait for something and then realize, oh my gosh, we really have a problem. So that's super important, I think, especially in private industry, that we look at those types of things. Yeah.
And it's interesting because I was mentioning this conversation with the banker that I had, and it was sort of what are you talking about? What do you mean? Yeah. I feel like this is something that there should be conversation around for the debt covenant, exactly like you said, and it didn't sound like this individual is aware of it. So it was, I don't know if maybe that was just him or
So the banker's reaction was non-awareness?
Was a little bit of lack of awareness. I found, and I've heard that from a few others, anecdotally, but then I actually So I said, all right, well, I'm in this conversation talking to this guy. Let's talk. What do you know about the lease changes? And it kind of not a whole lot of awareness. So I feel like it's definitely an area where there's an opportunity to I guess, educate and
absolutely
learn about what's going on.
I don't think we can educate enough about these two standards and the impacts that they're going to have. I really don't. I think the more we can talk about it, the better off we are.
Yeah,
I agree.
Talking about the fact that lessee versus lessor side of things only changing on one side, but on the public sector side that kind of had change on both sides. Can you talk about that? What is for lessors? Because I guess from my perspective, I've read about the lessee side, but not as much about the lessor side.
Yeah, most of the attention, if you will, has been on the lessee side. For whatever reason, there's less lessor accounting on the government side. Most of it is going to be on the lessee side. And I mentioned at the beginning of our discussion that this was focused on, initially Lease Vision was born out of an idea to help our airport clients. And the thinking was really along the lines of the lessor side. I mentioned all those concessionaire agreements. That was one of the things that pushed it along, and it's grown from there. But the biggest difference, I would say, between the two standards is just how each authoritative body is handling lessor accounting. GASB has completely changed that. Basically, you're going to have a present value of your lease payments is going to become a lease receivable. The offset will be what's referred to in my world as a deferred inflow of resources. And the asset that's sitting on the books on the lessor side, that capital asset, if you will, that will remain on the books. It will not come off the books. It will not be derecognized like it could be today. FASB is not handling that at all. They really have, just as Jessica mentioned, have left the lessor accounting the way it is today. while the lessee accounting is very similar between the two, lessor is completely different. And that's something that the public sector or the governmental clients are going to have to deal with uniquely, if you will, going forward.
How's that been so far? What's that experience been like, and how has it been able to help, really?
For me, so I am a tech geek wannabe, I guess is the best way to describe it, which is why the Excel tool has been, that's been kind of my baby, so to speak. I like digging into the technical standards. I like finding ways and making sure we can adopt and implement, but efficiency, helping clients, being seen as that trusted advisor that we tout at BKD, that's what's really important. And I feel like we've done something that lets us do all those things.
Yeah.
And it's not very often, I think, that you get a chance to do something that can be this impactful and have fulfill such a great need that I think is out there for our clients and prospects. So
yeah.
And if you think back to that stack of leases that we keep talking about and going through that stack and the amount of time that will take, if you could just cut that time in half or by 2/3 and give that time back to somebody, that's phenomenal. All of us, no matter what walk of life, we're all too busy. We all talk about it. We all have more on our plates than we can do. To get hours back in a project is incredible. And that's the promise of what Lease Vision will bring, is it will cut your time down. I won't eliminate it. It won't do everything for you. That's definitely true. It's still technology, and it's going to need some interaction from all of us, including the client. But at the end of the day, it's going to reduce that time. Once you've gone through the first few leases, it will start to really flow. And for those organizations that have 1,500 leases, that could really create real savings and real dollar savings for what could end up being a very worthwhile investment. So
everyone is just excited about having a solution. Excel, I think, is the key because people are used to Excel. They're comfortable with Excel.
Yeah.
They don't have to learn some new software. They don't have to pay a license fee. Once you purchase Lease Vision, it's yours, and there isn't ongoing recurring costs or anything like that to keep using the same tool that you bought. So, that's a big benefit as well.
Sure. Yeah.
So that all those things kind of just make it's comfortable for people. It puts them in an area that they don't go, oh my gosh, this crazy new software, and now I got to learn one more thing, and now I got to figure this out. And that it's in their wheelhouse, and it makes it so much easier for them.
We've already got a crazy new standard,
Right.
Right.
Why figure out a crazy new software at the same time?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what haven't we covered so far with either the changes, the upcoming adoption, and maybe the solution to helping with it?
I think we forgot to mention one key piece, which it kills me that we didn't do this. We have a roadmap that goes along with our solution. So we have Kira, which will extract all the components out of the contracts. So that's our AI piece. And then we actually have a roadmap we've constructed for both GASB and FASB, which takes you through the standard. It talks about all the adoption, all the rules, gives you examples, really talks about internal controls, setting up your systems, looking at your staff, takes you A to Z through the process of adopting either standard, depending on which side of the house you sit in. And then with the Excel tool then being the third piece to kind of bring it all together and actually do the math, essentially.
We believe that, one, the cost of that investment will pay for itself just in the time that they'll save. And down the road, once it comes time for the audit, whether or not it's BKD doing the audit or some other auditing firm, they're going to have this nice package put together that they can show their auditors, say, this is what I've done. It should help reduce audit time. It should help reduce audit fees, at least to some extent.
Yeah.
And really, we believe we have a full package that will pay for itself many times over when it's all said and done.
Well, the time savings alone, because that is, like you said earlier, that's everybody's struggle, right?
Right.
It's just
Right.
not having enough time.
We all have the same 24 hours. And
That's
so
right.
let's make the best use of that 24 hours a day we have.
Yeah.
And every one of our clients has a day job that probably goes well beyond the implementation of either the FASB or the GASB standard. This is something on top of everything they have to do.
Yeah.
Again, that time savings, we believe that's the huge benefit to Lease Vision, is just the time savings.
Definitely.
Well, it's exciting to hear kind of, a way they can, because it really helps. It adds value, saves time, helps with the challenges that we talked about of implementing this. So yeah, anything else that we haven't covered that we want to maybe throw in?
The biggest challenge in my opinion, to this, both standards, FASB and GASB, is just the completeness. Do you have everything across the organization, whatever it might be, and finding everything. If you're a decentralized organization where people are entering into lease agreements, just think how many copiers are in a large organization, whether or not it's a private company or a municipality or an airport or whatever it might be. To look at each of those copiers individually may not be that material, but when you start putting them all together, it gets to a big number pretty quick.
Yeah.
So, and someone has to capture all that. We think data mining, while it's not a direct piece of lease vision, could really help in that area and can help pull out some of those recurring payments every month and say, I didn't consider this one. Maybe I need to look at this lease as a final check. And it's probably something that's very helpful on the audit side as well when it comes time to test that completeness.
Well, this was great.
It was great.
I learned a lot about it. Thank you guys for sharing it. And I can just tell how excited you are about it.
We are.
Thanks, Chris and Jessica. If you feel like your vision is less than 2020 and you'd like to learn more about tackling the new lease standard, check out the show notes of this episode, which are available at bkd.com/simplytax for links to additional resources and for ways you can contact Chris and Jessica with questions. I would really appreciate it if you'd also leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts to let us know what you think, as ratings and reviews go a long way in helping others simply find the Simply Tax podcast. I would also really enjoy connecting with you on social media. You can find me out on Twitter, where I tweet about tax at Damien Martin CPA, on Instagram, where I post about my life at the intersection of tax and being a dad at TaxDad, on YouTube by subscribing to our Simply Tax YouTube channel, and out on LinkedIn. I'm Damien Martin, and thank you for listening.
The information contained in this episode of Simply Tax is based on data available as of the date of its release. BKD is under no obligation to update this information if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances. Any information provided is not to be considered as tax, legal, or financial advice. Please consult your tax advisor before acting on any matters covered.